Hi there, Alex here at mixinglessons.com. In today's video, we're going to talk about something called the paradox of choice, and we're going to talk about how it relates to us as home studio users. The paradox of choice states that the more options you have, the harder it becomes to make a decision. The paradox of choice also states that the more options you have, the less likely you are to be satisfied with the decision that you make when you finally make it. And with modern day digital recording, I think we've got access to so many different tools that this is something that's really worth thinking about. And so in this video, we'll talk about how that relates to us and some of the things you might want to consider so that you don't fall into that trap when you're producing music. Before we get started, as always, I've got 3 free guides for you to get access to in your home studio. I've got an EQ cheat sheet, a compression cheat sheet, and a vocal recording guide. And you can get all 3 at mixinglessons.com/free-downloads. Okay, so with modern day digital recording, it's not uncommon to have access to tons and tons of plugins. So you might have 10 EQ plugins, 15 compression plugins, 12 reverb plugins. And a lot of the time, that's seen as a good thing. It feels like you've got this really well-equipped home studio where you've got something for every eventuality. But in practice, what can actually happen is you can sit down to mix something and you'll pull up an EQ plugin and you'll start EQing. And then you'll think, I wonder how this might sound with a different EQ plugin that I've got. And so you'll load up that EQ plugin and you'll try it with that one. And then you'll think, I'm not sure. Let me try a third. And then you'll realize how much time you spent EQing the same thing. And you'll think, right, I've got to make a decision. I'll pick this one. And then it won't be long until you start to feel a little bit disappointed with that decision you've made because you think, no, I think I should have used the first one. Or I think I should have used a fourth one that I didn't try yet. And so whilst it can be beneficial to have loads of different kinds of EQs and compressors and reverbs and delays and whatever else you use when you mix, it can get out of hand and it can start to get in the way of actually producing music. And not only that, it can mean that you end up feeling disappointed with the mix once you've done it. Because rather than thinking, I'm happy with the way I've EQ'd this, I'm happy with the way I've compressed this, you're thinking, would this have sounded better if I'd used a different EQ, a different compressor? So your focus is kind of on the wrong thing. It's not about how you're producing the music, it's about what you're producing the music with. Now, I'm not saying that you should only have one of each plugin. There are reasons to have different variations and different versions of things. If, say, for example, you only had access to a spring reverb, then you would have something which would probably sound really, really nice on an electric guitar, but it wouldn't sound very nice at all on a drum kit. And so, yes, there are reasons to have multiple versions of things. But personally, I think it's really, really useful to limit your choices in a home studio. And that's quite a personal thing. The right amount of EQs to have or the right amount of compressors to have is unique to you. What will be too many for one person will be too few for another. Depends what kind of music you make, depends what kind of instruments you record, depends how you like your mixes to sound and what options you want to have available to you. But there can come a point where you have too many options. I also think it's worth thinking about how studios would have been in the days of analog. You know, in those days, maybe the only EQ and compressor you would have been the ones built into each channel of the console, and then maybe there'd have been a couple of other options of outboard equipment, but it's very unlikely you would have had 20 different EQs or 15 different compressors in the way that you might have with digital nowadays. Now, in one of the studios that I use, when you click an insert point to load a plugin, there are literally hundreds of different plugins on that computer. There are probably 50 compression plugins. Then there are compressors on each of the channels on the console, and then there is a rack of outboard compressors to choose from as well. So there are so many options, and what I've kind of had to do is decide which are my favorites, which ones I really like working with, and I kind of use those as my go-to. It's not to say I won't experiment with other ones, but I've had to limit my options a little bit. Same goes for microphones. There are so many microphones. Now, sometimes it is beneficial to have a bunch of different mics. You know, sometimes you're recording a singer and it is really useful to have a few different microphones to audition and find what works best for them. But if you're a home studio user, to my mind, the best thing you can do is select a few pieces of equipment, whether it's mics or plugins, that you find really, really work well for the music that you make and stick with those. So in my home studio, I have a few microphones, a few plugins, and I really like each of them. So I don't go through that process of trying things with loads of different plugins to see how things sound. I like the way the plugins that I use sound, and my focus goes straight to how am I going to EQ this? How am I going to compress this? Rather than what should I use to EQ this? What should I use to compress this? And I never really get to the end of a mix and think, oh, I wish I'd used something else, or I'm not happy with this because maybe it would have sounded better with a different EQ plugin or a different compressor. So I hope that gives you something to think about. If you've got any questions, just let me know. Don't forget to head over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads for those free guides. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel if you find these videos helpful. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.